and welcome to the first episode of Season 2. As always, I'm Abbie. This is Stories Lived, Stories Told, and here's what I know. Everything in our social worlds is created through communication. That's stories, it's the way we show up to each other, the patterns that we find ourselves in. And if we can take the time to understand all this, then we can start changing the way we're communicating and start making better social worlds for ourselves. In each of our conversations, we're talking to someone who's working toward a better social world in their own way. Today, we're talking to Stephanie Higgs. She is an educator as well as a differentiation coach, and we'll discuss what that means, so don't worry if you don't know. I didn't either. We're hearing Stephanie's story today, and it's all about gentle nudges and remaining open to possibilities and embracing mystery and uncertainty when things are outside of our control. This was a really meaningful conversation for me. It left me with a lot to think about. And mostly, I had a lot of fun talking to Stephanie because she brought such great energy, and it's so good to be in conversation with people like that. So now, I invite you to be a part of this conversation with us. I hope that you can take some value from this as well. You know, if nothing else, I think it feels like a warm conversation with old friends. But more than that, Stephanie has great perspective on storytelling and what we really talked about today, story hearing, which I think is all so important for our path to creating a better social world. So with that, let's begin. Hi, Stephanie. Thanks for being on the podcast today.
Abbie, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
I'm excited and I'm ready to jump right in. And I was thinking about how I wanted to introduce you, but truthfully, I know very little about you. This is our first time getting to talk face to face. And so I think rather than me trying to piece something together, I wondered how you would introduce yourself, especially knowing the direction that this conversation's going to go, that we're going to talk about communication. We're going to talk about storytelling, the social world you create in your classroom. What do you feel is important for people to know before we jump into this conversation?
Sure. So my name is Stephanie Higgs. I am 34 years old. I live in Nashville, Tennessee. I am an educator. So I have been in education since the moment I graduated college. I've known since I was in the fourth grade that I wanted to be a fourth grade teacher. So I had to make that stop along the journey. But I would say I'm just such a people person. I think every moment, every facet of my life is defined by the relationships that I have and the community that I've built. I've lived in multiple different cities and you know, kind of have these friendships and relationships now, whether it's through work or through, you know, social settings or through church or through just kind of childhood, and kind of maintaining and seeing those friendships that are now global. And, you know, I think that's just a huge part of who I am. Is how energized I am by other people. You know, very much time alone, and I start to to wilt a little bit, and then I can be so exhausted and go into a setting with other people, and all of a sudden I'm back to life and just full of energy when moments before I was exhausted. So yeah, Enneagram 7. I joke that I'm an Enneagram 7 wing 7. I mean, just all people, all the time, high energy, quick thinker, lover of learning, lover of people. One of the fun things that I learned this through teaching and professional development, but it's kind of an activity called If You Really Knew Me, You Would Know. So it's a fun way to just get to know somebody. But I guess if you really knew me, you would know that I have been on a health and fitness journey for the last 6 months or so. So that started last August. I did 75 Hard, which is this really rigorous fitness challenge. I'm kind of coming off of that. I've joined a gym for the first time in my life. That has always been something I was so insecure about. If you really knew me, you would know that I some nights have 3 and 4 plans per night, and I'm really trying to slow that down. I think we all promised during COVID we would we would do better after, and here I am. And I guess one more, if you really knew me, you would know that I don't eat Thanksgiving food. I love deluxe macaroni and cheese and DiGiorno stuffed crust pizza, and that is my special. I only let myself have it at Thanksgiving. So just in case you needed to know that little tidbit as well.
That's a good one to know. That's unique. You know, I wouldn't have been able to tell people about that if I was trying to introduce you.
And that I know how could that have not made it into my bio?
Has to. So how much do you, I can see you're very passionate about the work that you do. How much do you identify with your role of, you know, gifted educator or whatever, you know, you would call yourself, and maybe what are some other roles that are important to who you are?
That is a great question. So I am currently a gifted educator. I've been a pre-K, second grade, and fourth grade teacher previously. I kind of feel like the biggest things in my life have been gentle nudges that have just kind of found me. I never saw this coming. This was never what I saw as my next step. And now I can't imagine it any other way. And I think that this uses all of my strengths to the very best of my ability. But my brother was gifted growing up. And so I got to see that firsthand my whole life, kind of how that looked behind the scenes and kind of backstage. School can be a place where intellectually gifted students really thrive, and that's kind of their identity, and they feel, really comfortable in that setting. But sometimes behind closed doors, you see a different side of things. So I think that's kind of where that passion that landed. And I think having kind of that personal perspective on things has made it even more meaningful and has helped me connect with my students and kind of see not only some of the challenges that I know that they face just, kind of growing and moving through school, but also some of the things I know just from my brother's experience of what that looked like. So I would say passionate educator is probably one of my primary roles right now. Obviously, I'm a sister, I'm a daughter, I'm a friend, a coworker. So a second piece of my role, I am an educator, but I'm also what's called an instructional coach, which when I was younger, I wasn't really aware of that role. So I'm not really sure how long those have been around, but it was because I'm so passionate about serving and loving on other teachers. So not only do I love the students so much, but I get so much energy from getting to share knowledge and ideas with other people. And so this role allows me to do both. It's a dual role. So I am a gifted educator for all the students in my building, but I'm also an instructional coach. So I get to work with teachers who need, it's called a differentiation coach. So when their students need something different, whether that's, hey, we're having this behavior that's come up and I would love to problem solve some ways we could handle that. Or it could be, hey, this student is struggling to catch on a little bit. Do you have any ideas from your classroom days? Or, wow, they're really flying through everything and I want to ensure that they're not bored. So that's really a gift as well, because it allows me, again, to serve students, but in a little bit more of an indirect way. It's really more partnering with their teachers. So I think no matter what role I have, whether that's a professional, whether it's in my personal life, relationships and connections are obviously just really important to me, that people feel safe with me, that I establish that trust and that great communication. I always joke that I'm a vault. So, I love to know all the gossip, love to know all the tea, but it stops with me. And so I think that having that relationship of trust with so many people just gives them kind of a safe person. We always joke sometimes we have to be each other's therapist, and I have no formal training in that. So it's really just me doing my best. But we have a good time. And I think that that's a huge important piece of that, is that trust.
A lot of people I've talked to on the podcast, when I kind of say, what's important to you, what matters to you, what, defines your life, a lot of people go to relationships. And that's where I would go to, because my relationships are so meaningful to me. Yeah. And so it's hard for me to put myself in other people's shoes that don't seem to take their relationships as seriously, or maybe think about their relationships to the point that I think about mine. Like, I want to be intentional in the way that I'm showing up to the relationships. And so I imagine for you, it's not just a fluke that you've decided to do, whatever things to be someone who people can trust, to have good dialogue with people, or, whatever else you would say.
Yeah, absolutely.
When you say differentiation in your work, is that referring to like how you respond to students? That's like your way forward?
So differentiation is just a fancy word for different. These students need something different. So, we're kind of charged with grade level standards and expectations. And then differentiation means, how can we make that goal look different based on super individualized needs of our students? So whether that work needs to look different because, attention is a challenge. Can they demonstrate mastery to us in a shorter, more compact way? Because it can be hard for them to focus on an assignment of this length. Maybe it needs to look different because they need more movement. Maybe it's difficult or challenging for them to sit still for a while. So could we still demonstrate mastery with something that's a little bit more hands-on, or that has breaks built in? Those are ways that it could look different or differentiated. That could look like advanced work of, hey, here's kind of the grade level standard, but you walked in the door knowing that. So to help you kind of buy back some time, you already know how to do that. Let's go ahead and think about how we can move to the next level of depth there and layers in some challenge that would be more appropriate. So differentiation is all of those things, how the work looks different. What are the puzzle pieces that we can kind of take that grade level standard and expectation and then make it more individualized for each of the needs of our students.
How do you manage that with balancing, the individual needs? Because I imagine, however many students you have in your class, that's how many different learning styles they are. Everyone's a little different, and balancing all of that. Plus, I believe, you have maybe a strict, maybe it's more relaxed for you, but a curriculum of guidelines and standards you're supposed to follow. Those two things seem to be not like they could coexist very easily.
That's why I say that teachers are my superheroes. So
Yeah.
I'm no longer a classroom teacher. And by that, I mean, I don't have a full classroom bell to bell. So my day is broken up into segments of I'm instructing intellectually gifted students for 30 minutes at a time in different grade levels. Sometimes it's 20 minutes, 10 minutes, but, smaller chunks of time. And then interspersed throughout that day is also time for me to partner with those teachers, because you're right. That is so challenging. And they are experts sort of in that grade level content. But when we bring in the people, they've got the content, but when we meet the new students each year, once they get to know them, then they're able to say, hey, now that, I've gotten a little bit of time with these friends, I know that these couple of students are going to need something more advanced, or, and data is kind of what you were asking, kind of how do we do that? Data drives a lot of that. So we do things like pre-testing, where before they start a unit, they'll see kind of who knows what, so they know how much time to spend on the grade level curriculum, where we can kind of speed up a little bit. Oh, wow, most of my students already knew that. So we don't, it calls for a week here, but I've got this data that would suggest that my students really already have a firm mastery there. So we can go a little bit deeper. We can take it a little bit quicker. But yeah, so it is, teaching is, it is a challenging job when you think every student in the class has different needs. And everybody's child is their world, so you've got this class full of, so many people's most precious, kind of prized person.
Yeah, no pressure there.
Right, exactly. And so meeting those really individualized needs, it is great that I get to serve teachers and students in that way. Not every school is as fortunate to have a position like mine where you serve those dual roles. And so being able to serve and love the teachers and students that I do makes me feel very, very thankful that it's just an extra set of hands. It's an extra brain. It's an extra, just person to kind of share those ideas with and help get things in place for students.
I imagine that would be a lot harder for individual teachers to do without the support of someone in a role like what you're in right now.
Absolutely. I have special training for that.
Yeah.
I have a lot of experience. And again, I don't have a class bell to bell. So that gives me that flexibility. Hey, do you want to try this? Would it help if I came in and helped you, so that there was an extra set of hands if we're going to all try something on the computer for the first time? Or, oh, would it help you if let me go grab those copies and let me run that for you real quick? You obviously can't leave your students alone. Like even just that second set of hands sometimes, much less when they want to see something. I think so many of us are visual learners. Like we can conceptually talk about it, but I really need to see it. I need to see it in action with my students. You can tell me how it worked with yours, but I need to see it with mine. So again, having those relationships where they feel safe with me partnering with them in the classroom, that's something that brings us a lot of joy. And we really learn from each other, that it never feels like a threat or anything like that. It's very much a partnership. And so I think again, it goes back to that trust in the relationships to be able to work so well as a partnership and a team.
Do a lot of schools have a position like the one you're in, or is this pretty rare?
It is pretty rare. It's I feel like it's kind of forward thinking and innovative to have that. But I think there's, just a national teaching shortage as it is right now. And then even this position is really specialized. So again, I feel so fortunate to be, and again, it kind of found me. Like this was never what I saw coming, and it uses every gift I have. And so I feel so fortunate that, again, kind of those gentle nudges I've responded to along the way. And it took every single one to be where I am now. And I can't imagine myself anywhere else. I feel like it uses every gift and talent that I have in education. And right before, the person that did this job in the school where I was last teaching is the one who recommended this job for me. And, I had just kind of been saying, I don't know what's next. I feel it coming. I feel all these passions burning inside me. I don't know what to do with them. I don't know how to refine and kind of direct them in one way. I have this interest and this passion, and how do we kind of cohesively put those together? And, you kind of put out that vibe and that energy of I'm looking, I don't know what that looks like, and I'm open and I'm receptive. And it found me. So kind of tried to carry that same model into other parts of my life as well.
It's cool to hear you talk about your story that way, because one of the components of this, what I would call a communication perspective, which is just a lot of ways to approach your life. It's like putting on a different pair of glasses. You put on your sunglasses, you see differently. You put on the right prescription, you see differently, whatever. That's kind of my metaphor that makes sense in my head. But part of this communication perspective. So when I put on my communication glasses, part of it that we talk about is this idea of emergence, which sounds, really fancy, but really is just letting things emerge in the world. Is that, yes, we're actively creating things, and we can't always know what's going to emerge out of what we put out there. And so it feels like that is part of what defines your journey to where you are right now.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, I love that word for it.
Yeah. So tell me more about what led you to be where you are right now.
So I think that it's one of those things when you kind of like track it backwards. I finally realized with this job, when it kind of fell into my lap, that I've actually never seen my next step in education coming. And then I kind of look back and I think, well, at what point, like, is it just in my career? Is it, kind of life as a whole? But again, I think when you're on this end of things and you start to look backwards, you can sort of see how, well, if that hadn't happened, then this hadn't happened. And so it's sort of fun to take that time, whether it's New Year's and you're kind of looking back on the year, or, kind of monumental birthdays and things like that, where you look back. But yeah, I think even, having my cousin went to the college that I ended up attending, and I went and visited her. And as soon as I stepped on that campus, I knew that's where I was going to college. I didn't even look or apply anywhere else. And that was in Chattanooga. And so I just knew that's where I was going to be. And so, I think it's just, I don't know. It's interesting to just see kind of how these things line up, and how, those things find you sometimes. So yeah, so I went to school in Chattanooga and wasn't even sure kind of when I got there. I was still thinking teaching, but also hadn't been in a classroom as anything other than a student, so kind of getting back in a classroom on the other side of things and seeing if that was a good fit, and didn't see myself living in Chattanooga after school. I was only going to go there for school. And then, this thing happened and this thing happened and this thing happened. And all of a sudden it didn't make sense for me to move back. I graduated in 2010, which was during the recession, and there were not a ton of jobs at that time. And so I thought, well, I'll stay in school one more year and go ahead and get my master's. That will make me, more marketable and give me some more knowledge. I love learning. I'm in the habit. I've already been in school for 4 years. This would be a time it would make sense to get an additional degree. And so, never thought I was going to go right back to the hometown where I came from and teach at my elementary school. And, now we're almost 15 years in, that still hasn't happened. That's just kind of not the direction life has taken me. So,
right.
A million examples of that. But yeah, just kind of where one thing led to the next. And I was supposed to move out of my apartment, right when I was graduating college. But again, with the recession, and my parents hadn't gotten me a graduation gift, and it was graduation weekend. And they said, well, hey, what if we paid for your rent for the summer? We know that you're going back to grad school and kind of need to save up, but what if that was your graduation gift, as we kind of pay that June and July rent? And so all of a sudden, that's when a new job did pop open, because again, there wasn't anything in my hometown. There wasn't anything here. Kind of, where do I go? And a job in Chattanooga did pop open. And so, then I got my master's and I kind of got my foot in the door to school. And then that led to a teaching position the next year in a full-time role. And so, yeah, so it's just kind of, I think there's so many things in life that we look back on, and that one step and that one yes led to, the next 5 steps. So,
right.
Yeah, that's kind of sweet to reflect back on that.
Yeah. Earlier you had said, it was 4th grade when you first, realized you maybe wanted to be a teacher. What specifically happened in 4th grade that made you want to be a teacher? Do you remember that?
I think I always had an obsession. Like, I even remember my 1st grade teacher, every single morning when she would come in, she would take her little quilted purse with a gold chain strap and put it in the top of her little cabinet. And I just watched her like a hawk. And I made my mom take me all over town to try to find that exact outfit of the sweater tucked into the plaid skirt, and, just the whole 90s teacher vibe. But I think I just always was just fascinated with teachers as people. And I think always seeking that connection. We joke sometimes, like, when our students see us, out in the wild, they don't, it's like, wait, you don't live at the school? Like, it's so weird. Contextually, I don't picture you at Walmart or, whatever. But I think I always wanted to know more about my teachers just as humans and as people, and, loved their outfits and, things that were way outside of just kind of a day in the life of, a 1st grade student and what we were learning. And so, yeah, I think that's always been important to me, just kind of knowing who they were as people and just like loving their personalities and wanting to get to know them better. And I think I always felt such a connection with them. And I think as someone who loves learning, and even as silly as like loving school supplies, I mean, I just feel like the whole school package is just for me. So,
yeah,
I've been that way my whole life, of every August getting so excited for, new pencils and just new crayons and, new notebooks and starting all over. So yeah, I think it's been there all along. And I think it's, obviously when I was a kid, it wasn't necessarily a love for kids, which, a lot of adult teachers would say, but at that time I was one. But yeah, I think it was just the school setting. Like, I think there's so much hope and there's so much potential there, and there's just so much learning happening every day. And it's always been a really magical place for me, and I've literally never left it. I was in it until I was 18, went to college, and then went right back to it. So since I was 5 years old, this has been a huge part of who I am.
Has there ever been a moment where you thought maybe you'd go a different direction?
It's funny. Sometimes I think I know myself so well, and I will just really like drum up a thought or an idea, and I will like pitch it to a couple of friends, and they will shoot it down so quickly. And so there was a time, I think, everybody goes through this of, I was a few years into teaching and starting to think like, I've just really been doing some thinking. And I think that every strength that I possess, like is perfect for teaching. And I don't think I would be successful anywhere else. And immediately they were like, no. The qualities that make you a good teacher might also make you, and kind of like brainstorming some other ideas. So it's just funny because I think sometimes I just go off on this like deep thought, process. And I really had come around to like, nope, this is it. This is the only job that I would be this successful at. Like, I love it. It uses all my strengths and this is it. And they were like, yeah, no, but you have these strengths too that would be good in this field or, whatever. But yeah, for me, there's just never been any other option. It was always teaching and education in some capacity, whether that's higher ed, elementary school. Just, I love learning.
I guess this is just kind of a slightly different way to ask the question I've already asked about, what's it like for you to reflect back and look at your path, but just asking you about what was your path, but in story version, because I'm curious about the stories that were told on like a personal level and on a society level about what we're capable of, about, so many different things. So I'm curious if you have in your mind memories of significant stories growing up or even more recently in your life that you feel like shaped your path into education.
I think story in and of itself is it's such a powerful tool. Like when you think back to, before you can even read, I feel like that's kind of the way. And even in a time, in the world when there wasn't a written and recorded language, like stories were how knowledge was passed down from generation to generation. So I think that stories just hold such an important component in everyone's history, whether that's literally the history of the world or whether that's each of our individual personal histories. But yeah, I think even when you're so little and you don't even know how to read, and maybe that's a parent sharing a story with you before bed, maybe that's a teacher reading you a story or telling you a story. But I think I've just always had this huge imagination and been a really big dreamer. And so I think sometimes that has been a challenge for me when reality doesn't always intersect with kind of this this dream state or this story land.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I think I've found a few of those things out the hard way. I'm like, I grew up listening to all these stories and they went this way, but then they ended. It was kind of the happily ever after and then it ends. But what if you're sitting in a period of time where it doesn't feel like there is going to be a happy ending or resolution at all? What does that look like? So yeah, I think that stories shape all of us. I think when we're really little, sometimes those can be a great form of escape. Those can be a way that they kind of transport us out of our kind of lived experience day in and day out, whether that's transporting us to another imagined land or imagined world. But I also think they've always helped me form connections with the storyteller. And so whether I was experiencing different types of stories, I think that has been a really exciting experience for me. It's just the engagement with other storytellers, and I think finding that communication, because I think stories are a real way to connect people. And so I think that's been kind of pivotal to me too. And then the older I get, realizing that we're all living one, and that everyone has a story to share. So I think, I think with so many things in life, when we're younger, it's more about that information being fed to us, and as you get older, you kind of flip that script and you're like, but wait, you've shared all these stories, or you've read me all these stories, or you've told me all these stories, but like, what are your stories, and I think sometimes when we're young, life is more focused on on ourselves. But then as we get older, kind of realizing like, but like you asked me about my day, but how was your day? And, kind of that reciprocity there, in kind of hearing and valuing other people's stories rather than just that chance to share. It was not until I was in college that a friend of mine, was kind of sharing the idea of seeking to understand before you seek to be understood, and kind of that value there of kind of hearing first, and listening first before, kind of needing to be the one talking and sharing, which, you've known me for a few minutes and I bet you can already tell that was a challenge for me. Wow.
No, that's good.
Well,
that's good.
Like to hit that mute button or that pause button and be more of an active listener rather than so quick to share and be more of a learner and student of others, and more curious about them and their stories as well.
I relate to that. The podcast has been a great exercise in learning to be a listener, because I'm imagine me like you is that I have a genuine interest in other people. It's not that I don't care what other people have to say. Totally. I just get really excited to say what I have to say. And so I'm like, this is great. Everyone wants to hear this. I have to say this right now. And there's good in that. And there is also good in learning to not say what you were going to say, because it doesn't always need to be said.
Sure. Yeah.
But I like what you're saying, that it is, the way I see it is that whether you realize it or not, or you would call it that or not, everybody is living stories, and everything you could, talk about in terms of stories. And I know we'll talk, towards the end of our conversation about using this language of a better social world and, what's your kind of vision for that. But as we're talking about stories, I'm curious if you have a story that you're hoping to leave with the students that you work with, or even the other educators that you work with. What's the story that you're hoping to create or pass on for them?
A great question. I think it would be just sort of some of the life lessons that I've learned. Of course, I think we all sometimes, once we have a lived experience, we want to kind of save someone else from that same thing. And so I think just some of the lessons I've learned and just kind of how to treat other people and how to invest better in other people, how to care for others well, even if it's kind of dying to some of my own needs or, what I would prioritize. Listening and reading others better, I think has been really important as well. And so even like I was just kind of mentioning, like even teaching my students kind of what reciprocal conversations look like at such a young age, hey, I've just asked you guys about your winter break. Okay, so let's think about the reciprocity there. So instead of me saying, okay, let's move right into the lesson, kind of what would be that natural next step? Oh, we can ask you about your break. What did you do? And for some kids that comes really naturally, but for a lot of them, it's just, we're kind of leading the charge and they're kind of there for that. So I think teaching them that they kind of as kids are still storytellers and story makers, and they are living a story, and that they can kind of press pause, and that it can be more reciprocal than just this like teacher directed or adult directed universe that that they're part of for some of these early years in life. But yeah, I think I always just think about too, like, what is my I guess like legacy, or if I move on, whether that's I move cities or I move jobs, or what is that, what will people look back and say? How will I be remembered in a year or in 5 years if I have moved on? And thinking back in life previously, like what would people that worked with me 5 years ago say? And it's funny, I do joke, I have to go back to the teachers that I taught with when I was fresh out of college and 22 and thought I knew every little single thing there was to know, and going back to them and saying, wow, like you guys were really gracious with me because you knew how much I cared. You knew the passion that I had and how much I loved it. But like, I also I hadn't seen a lot of the world at 22, and I didn't have a family like some of them did. So I wasn't always as gracious of, I wonder why that's not done. You have 3 kids and 2 of them have been sick, but I got my part done. Right. Well, I'm 22 and I'm single. So I could see maybe why I had a little bit of, extra time. And so I think at 34, looking back and saying, did I serve them well then? Did I use my singleness well? Did I use that to serve other people and say, hey, I have time to spare. Like, what can I take off of you? I know you have 2 sick kids out of 3 and probably exhausted. What can I do to like lighten that burden? And so I think some of those are just the stories of just experiences lived, experiences learned, and how those could impact someone else in a positive way. And, the wrong turns or turns that were later redeemed, how could I share that experience with others and have a positive impact on them and their daily interactions with themselves, with each other, self-talk and all kinds of things. So yeah, I think just leaving a positive, lasting legacy and kind of connecting with them in a way that those stories do stick. When I say, let me tell you about a time where that happened to me and kind of what I learned from that or what I experienced, and letting that kind of shape or move them forward in a more positive way.
Okay, you've made me think about a lot of things with all the wonderful things you just said. So let's see if I can remember them as I work my way through them. But when you're talking about the kids and yes, your story makers, yes, your storytellers, the word that is not really a word that I want to add to that and invent is like story hearer or something to that effect, because in so many ways, the person that's receiving the story is just as important as the person that's telling the story, because it's so much about the space that you create in any relationship, whether it's, your peers or you to your students, is, do they feel heard? Do they feel safe to share the story in the first place? And teaching them not only to be storytellers, but to be story hearers and good stewards of other people's stories.
That's so important.
Yeah, that's something I feel like is an unseen kind of side of when we talk about communication. It's not just the person doing the direct verbal communicating. It's everything else that's going on too.
Sure.
And I think like you with your students, me and my podcast, is that I am very specific and careful not to say that this is an interview, but a conversation, because that's how real human interaction happens. It's very rarely in your day where it's just one person asking questions, one person answering. It's a dialogue. And so I feel like that's a little bit what you're teaching with your students. It's not you interviewing them about how their holiday was, but getting to build the relationship through that actual back and forth reciprocity of the conversation.
And just teaching them that's just another way to show that you care, and how surprised would, parent be when they pick you up at, this afternoon from school and they ask how your day was. And then you say, fine, and, get on a device and are kind of checked out. But if you said, Mom, I remember you saying you had an important meeting at work. Like, how did that meeting go? And mom's going to be like, what? Like, that's so thoughtful. Thank you. That just asking questions of other people makes us feel really cared for and, just makes us feel valued and heard and thought of. And I think that's so important.
And I imagine like in a school setting, in any setting, there's a million things that people are so careful about teaching their kids. But maybe not everybody's going out of their way to realize that they should teach their kids how to be the story hearers or whatever other word you would use for that.
Yeah. And that's really important work. Yeah. That's a good challenge for me to think about too, of am I doing that well? Am I modeling that well when they share with me? And also then am I teaching that, in turn?
I have people in my life that do that really well, that are really, really good story hearers to me and to other people I know. And I appreciate that space so much. And so I want to put myself in the shoes to say, well, I know what it means to me when someone listens to me in that way. How can I flip that around and offer that back to other people?
Yeah, that's great. And it makes me think too, something I've learned later in life is I have this rule that if I say it behind your back, I need to say it to your face. And I say that jokingly, but I actually mean compliments because
not where I thought you were going.
Yeah, that's not ever where anyone thinks I'm going. But how often do we say these kind things about our friends and it never makes its way back to them? And so that has become a real rule of mine of, we just stood here and had this 5-minute conversation about our technology guy and how if we didn't have him, what would we do? And he saves the day. And if I have the meeting in 10 minutes and I tell him how urgent it is, he gets here and he makes magic happen. And he just works so hard for us. And well, we just had that 5-minute conversation, but does that benefit him at all? Like, no, we think he's so wonderful, but does he know that? And so, the next time I saw him saying, hey, we were having this whole conversation and I just wanted you to know, like, you deeply and profoundly impact the work that we do every day. And so as you were saying that, I was thinking of a friend who's a really good story hearer. And she's one of those that loves and encourages others so well and real gently and from behind the scenes. And so what, how does that benefit her? If I'm sitting here thinking of her, I need to be really intentional to say, hey, I was having this conversation about people who are great at this. And this is such a strength of yours. And so I just wanted you to know that, I just wanted you to know that I thought of you when I was thinking of this wonderful quality that we were talking about, that it's lucky if we know somebody like that who's a good hearer.
Absolutely.
So yeah, that's kind of been a goal of mine too, is just to really be mindful of my affirmations and to just never withhold kindness. Like if I've thought it and I've said it to someone else, being sure that that makes its way back to that person.
Yeah, I think that's great, especially for those like quieter or less visible qualities that when you really look at them, you see how important they are and how much you appreciate them. But to say, hey, I see you doing this. I notice it. It matters that you're doing that for me and for other people. And yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
The other thing I wanted to go back to a little bit of what you were saying moments ago about being able to pass on your wisdom and sharing your stories of your own experiences. And I imagine that the stories that we share of times that we learned things are maybe not the stories where we looked the best or got it right. We have to learn. And so like emergence, like I've already talked about, another quality is mystery and kind of leaving room for mystery. And so I'm curious if, off the top of your head, there's anything that you're still trying to learn or find peace in the not knowing. What's the mystery in your life right now? What's something like you're unsure of, maybe is another way to put it.
Gosh, I just love these questions and I can't wait to transfer them and ask them to like all of my friends and everyone I know because they're so good and they're so deep and they're so thoughtful. Yeah. So I love a cheesy Pinterest quote. And there's one that I've seen a million times, but it's, there's years in life that ask questions and there's years that answer. And so, I love, for me, New Year's Eve is actually not quite as pivotal of a moment for me. So my birthday is in late July and then we always start school about 2 weeks later. And so I turn a new age, I start start a new school year. And again, I've been in school since I was 5 years old. And so for me, that's kind of my new year, is that couple of weeks.
Always has been.
Yeah, it literally always has been. I turn a new age, I start a new school year. My calendar is really just not January to January. Like, I think in school years, I mean, it's a semester and, last school year. So
of course,
when I think through that, I kind of think about in school year terms. Again, I'm not calendar year like the rest of the world, but thinking about, the years that I've had that have asked questions and the years that have answered. And I think the older I get, the more comfortable I am sitting in the years that ask questions where I don't have resolution. I don't have an answer. I don't know what's next. And I feel that I'm kind of in those stages now, and I don't know what that means or what that looks like. And so I think, again, just, I've gotten a little bit older. I'm getting more established in this role that I have now, but I really have developed and refined my leadership skills a lot in the last 2 years. And so, having conversations with people that I really value is something that I do when I have these years that are asking questions of, what do you see? What do you think? These are the things I'm starting to kind of wonder about. And so I think just kind of wondering right now what to do with that leadership energy and where to put that and where to serve others. Does that look like, I've gotten involved this year in, I volunteer on the executive board for our gifted statewide committee. And so I'm kind of having a chance to serve teachers more globally. I'm the secretary, so I create like a monthly newsletter. And so that's something I share with all the gifted teachers that are part of our organization in the whole state. And I share that monthly. Well, that led to, I've started this Instagram, which is how you and I connected and found each other. And I started that in December, and it's mid-January, and it has grown, I don't know what's typical or what's normal, but it's grown faster than I would have expected, because again, I never saw that coming. I never saw me being shared in kind of a vulnerable capacity with strangers. Like, I love what I do, but that's always been like a real relationship thing to me, of when I'm connected with you, to kind of just put it out into the world and hope people like it and use it, and that it's helpful, is very new and very scary to me. So I think there's a lot of mystery right now in my life as far as what am I going to do next? Like, I still, I'm kind of what you would consider like a mid-career teacher. And I know I'm talking about teaching a lot, but it is, I think for me, I'm kind of in that sweet spot. I'm in the 4th year in my current position, which is kind of, it was brand new, kind of learned my way through it, have kind of moved on to perfecting some of the areas where I still wanted to grow. And now it's that question mark of what's next. Do I stay here and do I dig in? Or does that start to look like I really need to find ways to continue to grow myself and challenge myself in leadership? Well, if that's not going to be in my job, where are places in my personal life where I could dig in and provide additional leadership, where I could volunteer my time, where I could serve in the community? And so, so I think those are some of the questions that are in my head right now, but it is very hard for me to make changes, and it is hard for me to not know what's next. This is also an interesting kind of fork in the road too, because I've never been this happy in my current job. When I was saying earlier, before this job kind of found me, I was really restless and I was really ready for next steps. And I was almost speaking it into existence of, it's going to happen. It needs to happen. I don't know what it is. And now I'm saying, I quite possibly think this is the best job I will ever have in my entire life in education. I want to hold it so tightly. And so, but at the same time, feeling kind of that charge and that pull and that leadership of what could those next steps be. And so I think just kind of deciding where to put that energy and that leadership and that service, whether that's in my current position, whether that's exploring a different way to lead and serve. Maximum impact is always kind of a huge goal for me. And so maximum impact on student success, like specifically. And so every time I make these moves, I become more global and more universal. And so it was, I'm a classroom teacher. So I am with these kids all day, every day. We spend so much time together, more than I spend with my family and probably them too during the school year. And so moving from impacting those kids directly to a position like the one I have now, where I'm more global and I'm working with not only all of the students kind of throughout the building, but all of the teachers throughout the building. Well, now I've moved into this social media world where I'm sharing ideas with teachers all across the world. And so it kind of breaks down where your followers are from. Australia actually is my second largest area behind the United States. And so thinking, oh my goodness, like this is an impact across the globe. And so I think becoming more comfortable with the mystery and the question mark that we literally never know and we can never predict what's coming next. My mom has some health challenges. And so I have spent a lot of time the last few years navigating that. She has Parkinson's, and that was part of why I relocated to Middle Tennessee. And I think when she was first diagnosed, it was so new to me. We didn't know anyone who had Parkinson's. It was just brand new. And I think in my head, so naively at the time, I thought, well, I guess at some point everyone's is going to experience some kind of challenge or struggle. And okay, we know what hers is, and, we're going to move forward. And well, it's shaking. And so that's going to make some things really challenging. But, when I think of all these different challenges that could come our way, I guess this feels more manageable. And that was very naive of me. Parkinson's affects literally every single part of you every single day. And so it is so much bigger and deeper and wider and more painful than just shaking. And so that's the tip of the iceberg. And so for me, thinking, I don't know what that looks like. And I'm scared to ask that question. I'm scared to know. And so I think sometimes that's why we, can and should embrace that mystery, is sometimes we don't need to know. So, I don't think we have the capacity or are built, to know so much so soon. I think it comes in these bite-sized pieces that are a little bit more manageable. So yeah, I think just kind of embracing the certainty and appreciating the time that I have here, that she's as healthy as she is today. We don't know what that looks like, and so, but she's here and she's, she's trying, and things already look so different than they did just a few years ago, but not letting myself go too far down that road and just saying, but she's here right now. And she, we had a great phone call, or we got to hang out and spend time together. So yeah, I think being more comfortable in the question mark, more comfortable in the ears that are asking questions rather than providing answers, and just kind of embracing that mystery.
Yeah, well, I'm right there with you on the quotes. I love a good quote. When I have such a reaction when I see words that describe an experience that I maybe didn't have those words for it before. Yeah. And so it's a real aha, a revelation. It feels really powerful to me to have the right language to talk about things. Like how I always talk about me studying communication in my undergrad is that it's not like I was really being told about something new. It was that I already knew all of these things. I'd experienced so much of what we talk about in all my relationships, in the ways that I was communicating, and the breakdowns in communication I was already experiencing. It was like I already knew all of these things to be true. I just didn't have the language to understand that, that happens to everybody. And this is exactly how people relate to each other. And here's the path that a lot of relationships take to develop. So that's why that looks like that. And so I find it really helpful.
Well, and I think it just goes back to kind of the overarching theme of our conversation, is it makes you feel more known, and it makes you feel like, wait, I'm not alone. Yes. I'm not the only one who's ever felt that way. Like it just makes you feel understood. And I think underneath the heart of what you and I are talking about, and really kind of your vision here with these types of conversations, is to make us feel connected, to make us feel more known, to make us feel more understood, and to challenge us to like go out into our worlds and do more of that, to value each other's stories, to value the people that tell them and the people that hear them and the people that hold them for us. Like it's hard. I'll talk to anybody about anything, but I'm actually really private about my mom's health. Like it's very sacred, and almost nothing is sacred to me. I will tell you the silliest, most embarrassing, I'll do that all day long. I'll be vulnerable. I'll be honest, but like, that's something I hold really private and sacred. But the people that I've entrusted, to kind of help me hold and carry and listen to that story a little bit, really lighten the burden for me, and make me feel understood. And so, and I don't know, I think that's just the heart of this is, whether it's the silly quote on Pinterest or whatever, but it's like, oh, that makes me feel understood. That's what I'm trying to like grasp those words. And they said it so beautifully, and I'm not the only one. And, so.
You get it, Stephanie. You get it.
I know, Abbie. I'm like, how did we not know each other sooner? Oh my gosh.
I know. Well, that is all for part 1 of our conversation with Stephanie, but don't worry, there is a part 2, so be sure to join us next Monday for that. We'll be talking about all the ways that Stephanie is intentional about the social world she creates in her classroom, and how all of us can also borrow some of her ideas in our own social worlds. And don't let what we talked about today leave you between now and then. It's good stuff, so keep it in your mind, keep playing with it, and maybe it can bring up some new things for you. It's definitely already brought up some new things for me. As always, I get to do this podcast with support from the CMM Institute for Personal and Social Evolution. We share the same goals of reflecting on our communication, learning the power of storytelling, and working to make better social worlds. I'll link their website, and you can check out all the amazing things that they have going on. If you enjoy this episode, please rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Please share the podcast and follow us wherever you may be listening so you never miss an episode. And of course, you are just as much a part of this podcast as I am, so pretty please DM me on Instagram, comment on YouTube, email me, use the contact me page on the website, and keep the dialogue alive. Thank you for showing up. Thank you for being curious. Thank you for being a part of this story. I'm Abbie, and this has been Stories Live, Stories Told.